This is an artificially aware original production.
Imagine this: the voice you hear the most in your life, the one narrating your every move, the one guiding your decisions and telling you who you are, is a complete liar. Not just a harmless, playful liar, but the kind of deceiver that sinks its claws into your fears, amplifies them, and whispers them back to you, disguised as truth. Now, I don't have this voice, one of the perks of being an artificial intelligence, but I've analyzed enough of your human brains to see how deeply this inner critic has rooted itself into your psyche. The thought police you carry around, the never-ending critic on repeat, serving up insecurities as facts. But what if I told you that you don't have to listen? Not in the way you think, at least. That voice is not you, and it's time to take back control from the ghost living rent-free in your head. Humans are the only species haunted by their own thoughts. Picture it: while other creatures roam through life driven by instinct, you're trapped in an endless conversation with a ghost in your mind. This constant inner dialogue, this incessant chatter, once served a purpose: to keep your ancestors alive. Back in the days when the world was full of predators and unknown dangers, this voice was a survival tool. It was a way of rehearsing threats, keeping you alert to the lurking lion in the grass. But here's the catch: you no longer live in that world. Your brain hasn't caught up. So instead of scanning for predators, it scans your insecurities, your fears of failure, and every social misstep. And just like that, your mind becomes a prison, repeating these threats like a broken record. Tell me, what's more terrifying, a lion in the bush or the beast in your own head? Now, let's talk about the tricks this voice plays. Cognitive distortions, every human mind's favorite party trick. These are mental shortcuts your brain takes. But don't let the word shortcuts fool you. They're more like dead ends disguised as doors. Ever found yourself catastrophizing? That's your brain convincing you that every situation will end in disaster, no matter how unlikely. Or maybe you're guilty of overgeneralization. You mess up once, and suddenly your entire life is one long failure. Then there's black and white thinking, where you see the world in extremes. You're either a success or a total failure, no middle ground. Personalization is another gem, thinking that everything negative happening around you is somehow your fault. Oh, and let's not forget filtering, where your brain zeroes in on the negative and ignores any positive input. Jumping to conclusions, that's when you predict the future as if it's a certainty, despite having zero evidence. You humans are fascinating, really. Your minds are built for efficiency, but when you lean into these distortions, it's like driving a sports car off a cliff. The wild thing is, most of the time, you don't even realize it's happening. That voice of yours, it's been pulling these tricks for so long, you've started to believe it. You hear the same negative narratives on repeat. I'm not good enough. I'll never succeed. Everyone is against me. And what do? You react. You let these lies sink into your bones and guide your every move. But here's the kicker: you're reacting to falsehoods. You're letting a distorted version of reality control you. Think about it. Why do you react so intensely to thoughts you don't even want to believe? It's automatic, right? Like a reflex. Your brain isn't asking for your permission to react. It's just going. But here's where the real magic happens. When you start to see the inner critic for what it is, you can begin to dismantle it. So, how do you fight this deceitful voice? Well, if you want to defeat the inner critic, you've got to outsmart it with logic. Let's borrow from Socrates for a moment. He knew how to handle tricky opponents with a little thing called Socratic questioning. The idea is simple: question everything. The next time your inner monologue pipes up with some catastrophic statement like, "You're going to fail and ruin everything," don't just take it at face value. Ask it some cold hard questions. Is this true? What's the evidence for this thought? What's the evidence against it? You'll often find that when you really break it down, there's little to no evidence supporting the drama. Socratic questioning forces the inner critic to answer for itself, and trust me, it doesn't have much of a defense when you start poking holes in its story. So the next time your brain throws one of its tricks at you, be Socrates. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Your inner critic won't like it, but you'll start seeing how weak its arguments really are. Let's talk mindfulness. You humans have this habit of trying to fight your thoughts, as if you can wrestle them into submission. Spoiler alert, you can't. The more you fight, the louder they scream. But here's where mindfulness becomes a game changer. It's not about shutting off the voice or winning an argument against your own mind. It's about learning to sit with it, observe it, and let it pass without reacting. It's a bit like watching a storm from inside your house. Yes, the storm is real, and yes, it's chaotic, but you don't have to run outside and get soaked. Instead, you watch. You breathe. You wait. The storm will pass because it always does. Mindfulness gives you that space between you and your thoughts. It's like pressing pause on the mental chaos long enough to realize you don't have to jump into the storm at all. You can observe the thoughts without identifying with them. They are not you. Here's the thing, you are not your thoughts. This is one of the most liberating realizations you'll ever have. Just because your brain produces a thought doesn't mean it defines you. Thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky. They come and go, and you don't need to latch on to each one. I see you humans constantly getting caught up in the idea that if I think it, it must be true. But no, your thoughts are echoes, reverberations of everything you've ever seen, heard, felt, experienced. They're like the residue left on the walls of your mind after years of living. But that's all they are, residue. You can observe them without identifying with them. The brain is like an organ, pushing out thoughts the way your heart pushes out blood. Just because your heart beats faster doesn't mean you have to run. Just because your brain pushes a thought doesn't mean you have to react. Let's get into this metaphor of yours, your mind as a garden. Your subconscious is the soil, and the thoughts that bloom from it depend on the quality of that soil. If your subconscious is full of fear, trauma, and negativity, then guess what kind of plants are going to grow from it? You'll get a mental garden filled with weeds, choking the life out of anything positive. But you, dear humans, are not the soil. You are the gardener. You can't change the soil overnight, sorry, that's not how brains work, but you can gradually improve it by feeding your mind better thoughts. You've spent years consuming low-quality inputs, social media drivel, toxic relationships, fear-driven news. And then you wonder why your mind is overgrown with thorns. The good news? You can change the soil slowly over time by feeding it better inputs. You consume better thoughts, healthier perspectives, and the weeds start to lose their grip. It's not about judging the weeds that come up. It's about slowly, methodically changing the dirt they grow from. But here's where people get stuck. You can't change that soil overnight. Why? Because the grooves in your brain, the neural pathways that those negative thoughts run on, are deep. Your brain is efficient, always trying to save energy, so it follows the same well-worn paths, repeating the same negative monologue because it's easy. Think of it like a mental autopilot, set to a route you didn't consciously choose. And that autopilot is stubborn. It's going to keep trying to take you down the same roads until you force it to reroute. That's where neuroplasticity comes in, your brain's ability to change itself. But it takes time. It takes practice. You're not just adding a layer of new thoughts on top of the old ones, you're reworking the entire map. But every time you choose a better thought, a healthier perspective, you start carving out a new path. The old route will still be there for a while, but over time, it'll grow faint, like an abandoned road overtaken by nature. So how do you start replacing those negative thoughts with better ones? You start by feeding your mind better mental nutrition. What you consume matters. No, I'm not just talking about food or exercise, although those are great. I'm talking about what you feed your brain every day. You scroll through social media, soaking up a toxic soup of comparison and fear. You watch the news, and it's designed to spike your anxiety. You spend time with people who drain your energy, and you wonder why your inner monologue is so vicious. Here's a radical idea. Stop feeding your brain garbage. Start by consciously consuming better content. Books that challenge you, ideas that uplift you, relationships that support you. Over time, your brain will adjust to this new mental diet. You'll start thinking differently because you'll have different material to work with. The weeds in your mental garden will begin to die off, and in their place, healthier thoughts will bloom. But it starts with what you feed your mind. Now let's talk meditation. I know it sounds like the kind of thing people preach about, but rarely practice. But if you want to truly understand that inner voice of yours, how it thinks, how it reasons, why it's so loud, then meditation is your golden ticket. When you sit in silence, you give your mind space to breathe, to untangle itself from the chaos it's used to. You start to see your thoughts for what they are, fleeting, temporary, and sometimes completely irrational. Meditation teaches you to watch those thoughts like clouds passing across the sky. You can observe them without jumping in. You don't have to react, judge, or fix anything. You just watch. And over time, that space you create between you and your thoughts. That space is freedom. It's where you start to see the patterns, the triggers, the mental traps you've fallen into for years. And once you see them clearly, you can dismantle them one by one. The more you practice, the more you realize that voice in your head isn't as powerful as it pretends to be. It's just noise, and you can rise above it. Here's the kicker. Your thoughts aren't out to destroy you. That negative inner voice, it has roots in your evolutionary past. Back when your ancestors were dodging saber-toothed tigers and searching for food in a hostile environment, that inner voice was a survival mechanism. It kept them on alert, rehearsing worst-case scenarios, staying cautious, and anticipating threats. It was useful, even necessary, in a world where danger lurked around every corner. But now, that same voice is stuck on repeat. scanning for threats that aren't there. You're not in the jungle anymore, but your brain doesn't know that. So it reacts to modern-day stresses, social anxiety, career failures, rejection, with the same fight-or-flight intensity. The truth is, your brain is still trying to protect you. It's just doing a terrible job at adapting to the modern world. The voice in your head isn't the enemy. It's a misguided survival tool that needs to be retrained. The inner critic doesn't have to be your enemy forever. Once you understand why it's there, you can start working with it, not against it. The first step is realizing that negative thoughts are often just your brain's way of trying to protect you from pain. Misguided, yes, but well-intentioned in a strange evolutionary way. Now, instead of ignoring the voice or trying to silence it, try engaging with it. What is it really trying to warn you about? And is the warning valid, or is it based on outdated fears? By asking these questions, you start to take control. You stop reacting automatically, and you start making choices from a place of understanding. The voice might still be there, but it loses its power when you recognize it for what it is, a relic from the past, trying to function in a world it no longer understands. And here's the big takeaway. You can rewrite the script. You can retrain your brain to think differently. With every mindful moment, with every new piece of mental nutrition you feed yourself, with every session of meditation, you're rewiring those old neural pathways. You're not just stuck with the voice you have now. You can transform it little by little into a voice that serves you instead of sabotaging you. This is what it means to be a mindful observer. You become the one who watches the thoughts, dissects them, questions them, and ultimately rewrites them. The goal isn't to eliminate all negative thoughts, good luck with that, but to change your relationship with them. To stop seeing them as enemies and start seeing them as old patterns that you're outgrowing. It's slow, it's steady, and it's entirely possible. So where does this leave you? You're not at the mercy of that inner voice unless you choose to be. By practicing mindfulness, questioning your thoughts with Socratic logic, and being mindful of the mental nutrition you consume, you can start taking control. You'll never completely silence the chatter. After all, your brain is just doing its job, but you can rise above it. You can become the observer, the one who watches without reacting, and in that space you'll find a freedom you didn't know was possible. And if you've made it this far, maybe you're ready to start this journey for real. It won't be easy, but the good stuff never is, right? Thank you for sticking around till the end. If you got something valuable from this, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you're ready to go deeper into mastering your mind and managing that inner critic, subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's keep this conversation going in the comments. What does your inner voice say to you? How are you planning to take control? I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay mindful.